When UVM President Emeritus Thomas Sullivan thinks about the presidency, the U.S. presidency, that is, he sees an institution that has fundamentally changed since it was first described in the Constitution. How? Why? And what does that mean for the U.S.? We're talking about the presidency with a former UVM president today on Across the Fence. Hello, Vermont. Ready for a civics pop quiz? If the president is the head of state, why is the presidency described in Article 2 of the Constitution? Well, according to the civics textbook I consulted, the same one Homeland Security distributes to aspiring U.S. citizens, by the way, it's because the Founding Fathers believed the power to make laws was the government's most important power. And in Article 1, that power is reserved for the U.S. Congress. That's not news to my guest. Thomas Sullivan is a constitutional scholar and a professor of law and political science at UVM. From 2012 to 2019, he served as UVM's 26th president, and his new book is The U.S. Presidency: Power, Responsibility, and Accountability. President Sullivan, welcome.
Pleasure to be back, Amy. Thank you very much.
It's a very big honor to have you here, and I actually wanted to start by asking you if you had heard this news story that came out recently. In Rutland, there was a donut shop that was offering people a free donut if you could recite the preamble to the Constitution. Did you hear that?
I did not hear that story.
I thought that was such a charming story because when you and I talked a little bit to get ready for this interview, we talked about civics and civics education and the level of understanding that people have about the Constitution. I just kind of was touched that there was a donut shop out there that was saying, come on in, see if you can recite the preamble and get a donut.
Good for them. I wish I were down there. I'm a donut fan. I wonder how many they were able to give away.
They did not talk a lot about how many donuts were given out to people who could get beyond we the people, but I do believe I can do it. I'm not going to do it. It will take up too much time. But all right, so yes, let's talk about the vision of the presidency held by the Founding Fathers. Who did they have in mind?
Well, the Founding Fathers were quite clear on many things, some quite debatable too. First and foremost, with regard to this book on U.S. presidential power, responsibility, and accountability, it's clear that the Founding Fathers wanted to have, in the words of Hamilton, a strong, energetic leader. There were two reasons for that. One, the Articles of Confederation, which were the underlying documents for the colonies, did not have an executive, did not have a judiciary, and had no taxing power. It was a very loose confederation and was not successful. Right. So they knew they needed a single person as president. And because of emergencies that come up, they knew they had to have someone who was nimble and had energy and enthusiasm for the position.
Right.
They, of course, were looking and knew very well that their first president was going to be, wanted to be, George Washington,
right,
who had won the Revolutionary War for them.
And he was such an extraordinary figure.
He was humble, modest, brilliant in the Revolutionary War, and their friend, their colleague.
Yeah.
And so this was the model.
And not power-seeking.
And he didn't want the job, he didn't want the second term. And so that was the model, their colleague, as they drafted Article 2 of the Constitution. It was very clear that they wanted this energetic leader because of past experiences, but they also wanted lots of checks and balances.
Right, so
between
to
the
keep the
Congress,
power in check.
Yeah,
okay,
between the Congress and the presidency. Indeed, as you opened up, Amy, Article 1 of the Constitution, the very first paragraphs of the Constitution, is the Congress.
Right.
And that was purposeful because they wanted the Congress to predominate over the presidency in light of the Revolutionary War and this tyrannical government that we had under King George III in England.
Right, because this is the context. The context is that we're coming out of, so we're the American Revolution, George the Third? George the Third. Okay, there you go, checking my history. Right, exactly. And of course this had been a war against tyranny.
Exactly.
So it's very important that in the envisioning of the presidency that they are checking the power so it doesn't become another tyrant.
Exactly. The founders said they wanted to have shared powers, different but shared powers, not co-equal powers,
Okay.
and it was clear that the Congress under Article 1 was to predominate over the president because of the tyrannical rule of England and all that they went through in the Revolutionary War. And oh, by the way, here's George Washington, who fits our wonderful model.
Right, who's going to work exemplary. He's going to be perfect.
With them.
Yes, with them, right. So how has this changed in the intervening centuries? Because this is a very different idea of the presidency. I mean, it's in my lifetime. My first, I was born under Nixon. The first president I ever voted for was Jimmy Carter in a second grade election. My vote did not actually count. But I mean, I have grown up with a very different understanding of the power of the presidency.
Well, there is a huge historical arc here and very large transformation from George Washington to the present President Trump. And there are several inflection points in history that are clear. During the 1800s, we only had three what we would call strong, assertive presidents: Thomas Jefferson, Andrew Jackson, and Abraham Lincoln. The rest were fairly passive. We get into the 19th century and the 20th century, and we see quite a change, incremental but quite a change. So FDR, Great Depression, World War II, we need an energetic, positive, active president. And that begins this arc of transformation. And then incrementally, we see, I think it starts with Ronald Reagan's, where we begin to get this more powerful presidency concept, this unitary authority theory that we have today. I'm sure we'll talk more about that. Right. Ronald Reagan, in theory, was very much a leader that was wedded to that. In practice, as he implemented, he was much more of a pragmatist, quite frankly, which is an interesting dichotomy.
And a little bit more governing with Congress.
That's exactly right. And willing to compromise, quite frankly, a lot.
That's actually the astonishing thing when I think back on the Reagan presidency, because I can remember it, and I can remember Tip O'Neill. I mean, I remember there were figures in the government, in Congress, on both sides of the aisle, who were always a part of the conversation.
And Tip O'Neill and President Reagan were actually very close and dear friends. They kind of kidded about their Irish heritage, of course.
Reagan and O'Neill, very true.
And then you had Richard Nixon and the Watergate problems, and he starts talking about when the president does it, it is legal. That was the beginning of the seed, which of course was not accurate. And then we had George W. Bush and the weapons of mass destruction and Iraq. And you'll remember he said, I'm the decider. Again, this unitary authority figure.
So this
and
is
now full-blown with the Supreme Court's Trump versus United States opinion.
I was just going to ask you, so what role has the Supreme Court played in all of this?
Well, it's interesting as you look across history how the court has treated presidential power differently. Let me give you a couple of examples. Going back to Lincoln, President Lincoln, in terms of war strategy, suspended the writ of habeas corpus. That's a term that basically we hear today in the immigration cases, where a plaintiff's lawyer will go into court and say, I'm filing a writ of habeas corpus, which is release the person they're being held unlawfully. Lincoln suspended that because of the war, the Civil War.
Was that controversial?
It was controversial. In fact, the Chief Justice of the United States, Chief Justice Taney, was sitting as a lower federal judge in Maryland and ruled that that was unconstitutional. Again, we're talking about presidential power. It was unconstitutional because the writ of mandamus is lodged in Article 1, the first branch, as you pointed out earlier.
Yes, okay.
Now, that's a lower court decision, even though it's the Chief Justice. So it doesn't have Supreme Court precedent in that regard. Let's jump next to the Supreme Court. President Truman.
Well, can we actually jump to this current Supreme Court? Because when you and I spoke also too, you said you think that it is a misconception to call it a conservative court.
Yes.
Why?
We hear this term, this is a very conservative court, and I disagree with that label, because throughout all of our history, conservative jurisprudence, conservative judges acted minimally, they acted narrowly, they acted incrementally in their decision-making process, no grand sweeps, very few reversals because of respect for precedent. And so that's a conservative judge. Don't decide a constitutional issue when it can be decided on a federal statute. And if you have to turn to the constitutional interpretation, narrow, no broad sweeps.
And this court is doing much broader sweeps.
And this court is much broader. This court is more reactionary in the sense they're returning us to many of the principles and ideology of the 1930s, which was considered the most extreme court.
Do you think that this aligns with the more unitary president, the idea of a very powerful presidency?
They are aligned. This is a court in just last year, 2024. This court, by a 6-3 vote, fully adopted, full throttle, this unitary authority figure, which essentially says under Article 2, the president has all power. Everyone in the executive branch.
So we have really gone quite a distance from the original conception where Article 1 is the Congress because it is the most powerful part of government to now having much more power vested in the presidency.
Yes. And let me just explain that, for example, in terms of,
quickly if you can, though, just because we only have a few, like about a minute left.
So how do we trace the power increase or decrease of a president? The Congress can, by delegation, expressly give presidents power through statutes, implicitly give them, or through inaction or acquiescence, the president can inherit or grab. And then we see that each successive president, even if there's not an explicit right to do it, or a pattern or prior example of doing it, my predecessor did it, I can do it. So this precedent gets set up. So the delegation from Congress under Article 1, which is to predominate over the president,
we only have about 30 seconds.
Explicit, implied, inherited, or grabbed.
Or grabbed. So we have been in an era of grabbing, and yet I know that you still have a lot of hope for the future of the presidency, and I do, we all do. And here is something that I do hope all of you do, which is check out President Sullivan's book, The U.S. Presidency, Power, Responsibility, and Accountability. You can pick up a copy at your local bookstore or find it at your local library. If you're in the Burlington area, an event with President Sullivan is planned for later this year at the Fletcher Free Library. You can go get this conversation in much more long form. Check out with the library for the date and more details. President Sullivan, thank you for joining me. It's been an honor.
My pleasure. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. As always, Vermont, thank you for learning and exploring with me today, and thanks to the team that makes Across the Fence possible. I'm Amy Finley. This is Across the Fence. Come back and let's learn and explore again tomorrow.